And what does the cold case unit do?
So historically at BCI, we have always worked cold cases, kind of in a individualized unit aspect. We would work from the laboratory or investigations or criminal intelligence. And then when General Yost in March of last year made the dedicated cold case unit, the laboratory, criminal intelligence, and investigations unit all merged and created a more multidisciplinary approach to these cold cases. We started utilizing personnel, resources, and expertise from all the fields and disciplines that we can initially with these cold cases. So we'll have full case and evidence reviews where original investigators from the original agency, any personnel from our agency that's been involved or other agencies all work together as a team to review the case, review each and every piece of evidence, and figure out which investigative strategies could work best.
What makes something a cold case?
So from our standpoint at BCI, there's no standard cold case definition. What we look at are any unsolved homicides where most or all apparent viable leads have been exhausted. We look at missing person cases where the case is likely to be a result of foul play. And we also look at unidentified remains. We also don't limit it to just homicide. So we also look at cold case sexual assault cases that are within the statute of limitations, and sometimes even outside the statute of limitations if we're looking to identify a serial offender.
So like the Sherman case we know happened 8 years ago, but there were also 2 other cases that Cleveland police handed off at the same time. So these are all cases that now you start over? Is it square one? I mean, what's sort of the approach when you're looking at something that another agency had been previously investigating?
So when we're asked to assist on a cold case from an agency, we usually start with an assessment process. We'll go through 45 to 50 questions that are from all 3 disciplines, the laboratory, criminal intelligence, and investigations. We'll see if physical evidence exists. Has any physical evidence been destroyed? Was there a flood or a fire or some other disaster that caused evidence to be destroyed? We'll look at what analysis has been done on any evidence. Is there another outside lab, maybe the FBI or a private lab that has done work? We'll look at are any potential people of interest still alive in the case? Just a handful of questions that we look as an assessment process that we look through all 3 disciplines. From that point, whoever's assigned as an agent in the unit or from the laboratory as a scientist or from criminal intelligence as an analyst, we'll work to digitize that case file. So we'll take, if it's out, older cases where it's outdated, onion paper or thermal paper, we'll take those and digitize it to a media that we can all review and look at, and we'll preserve, that physical case file as evidence for that agency. Then we take that team of personnel, whoever's involved, original agencies or personnel from our agency, and they'll all review that case independently for their own thoughts, suggestions, and opinions. And then we hold a case and evidence review. So we'll spend a full day with all of those people who are involved and go through each and every piece of evidence and come up with those investigative strategies.
So after that point, I assume it's sort of like very dependent on a case, and you probably can't answer specific to the Sherman case yet, because that hasn't happened yet, right?
Correct, that has not happened yet.
You've just now you're in the process of digitizing the information, or where are you at in the process is a better question.
So for any of these cases, it's variable in how much, assessment work or review work is done. We may have a case that has a small case file and limited amount of physical evidence. So, naturally that process would be much shorter. In a case like Sherman, there's multiple agencies involved. There's, thousands of pieces of documents, of information. There's an unlimited almost amount of data and information that's there that has to be mined and processed and reviewed. And we need to collect and get it from each of those agencies that have been involved. So we're still in that review and kind of that assessment process of what all information is there with the case.
When we think back over this case, people have followed at least like a public TikTok of it. We know that there was video of someone running from the scene, and it was hard, at least at that time. I don't even think they identified whether that was a man or a woman running from the scene. How will you take a piece of evidence like that and re-examine it?
So you take, say, a video surveillance footage or even an item that's been submitted for DNA. What we will do is sit in that room and look at that item. Are there advancements that could be done from a DNA standpoint? Has something advanced in the last 5 or 6 years where it could be, reanalyzed? Is there a potential for familial DNA or investigative genealogy if there are profiles, or can we retest something to gain a new profile? On a video surveillance, it's much the same thing. What can be done from a technology standpoint, or can it be enhanced? Has it been tried to be enhanced? We're going to look at what all has been done for each and every piece of either surveillance or evidence. And maybe there isn't anything to be done. Maybe all the analysis that could be done or was available to be done at the time was done. And maybe, what the media that it was recorded on at the time only has certain limitations too of what can be done to it.
Will you conduct interviews?
We will conduct interviews. We will treat this case, as the agent that's assigned to it now. They're going to work, obviously, in conjunction with Cleveland Police and the original agency, but we will be doing interviews. If there's follow-up interviews or if there's people from the case file that we have not found an interview for, we're going to follow up with any investigative strategies or work that is needed in this case.
I know, this is probably an impossible question, but from where you sit right now, how does this case get solved?
I think this case is much like any cold case we look at. We want to make sure that any and all investigative leads, any and all investigative activities that could be done in the case are done. And we're hopeful that that leads us to, the closure and prosecution of somebody for this case. But even if it doesn't, we want to make sure this case file and the investigative activity is at a point that should technology or advancements increase in the next 5 to 10 years, it's at a point that they could be receptive to those new advancements as well.
And obviously in a homicide case, there is no statute of limitations on
Correct.
homicide.
There is no statute of limitations for homicide.
And so,
For murder, actually.
Yeah. And so in these cases, you are thinking, even if it's something doesn't present itself now, you're going to leave it in a way that you can continually re-examine it as technology improves.
Absolutely. My colleague, who's part of this team, always likens it to a jigsaw puzzle. We want to continue to find the pieces and put them together. And even if we don't find that piece in the next, year or 2 years, can we have it in a place where in 5 years that missing piece comes in and we now have that complete case file ready?
And you said in the cold case unit now you have about 140 some cases?
We have 146 active cases throughout the laboratory investigations and criminal intelligence.
And that the three, the Sherman case, the Stephen Holton case, and the Ryan Dixon case, those are 3 of the 146
Those
now?
are 3 of the...
And are they all sort of at the same stage at the moment?
They're at various stages. Some of them we're still obviously collecting case files. Some of them we've moved where we're reviewing case files or preparing for, the next steps if it's a case or evidence review. As I said, it all depends on the spectrum of how much information and data is there for us to review.
Yeah, makes sense. All morning you've been sitting with Jennifer. How hard is it? I mean, the emotional side of this. I mean, you work in cold case, so this feels familiar to you. This is what you do. But when you sit across from family who's been waiting for answers.
From a human standpoint, obviously there's an emotional side. As investigators, as a father, as having a family myself, it is an emotional aspect to it. I think everybody in the cold case unit, and I think that's part of why this multidisciplinary approach is so successful, because everybody takes a vested interest. It's what can be done to further this case, because we all have those feelings. We all look at it from that perspective, if this was my mother or if this was my family member or anybody else close to me, is everything being done that can to help bring closure to this case?
And you feel confident that with time, your cold case unit will say yes?
I think with time, we're able to explore every investigative avenue that we can. We're limited on cold cases. We're not able to go back in time for anything. We're not able to change the past. But we are confident in the fact that we will attempt and try anything possible, to lead that to the next step. Whether it's, solving it in the next year or if that's solving it down the road, it's at a position where the investigative leads have all been exhausted.
And of course, you can't go back into the past, but what are some of the challenges in a case like this one, about the fact that you weren't there 8 years ago?
I think any cold case has some natural challenges to that. Some of it is technology has advanced to where the standards or policies, protocol that law enforcement or investigators use, modern day, didn't exist back then. DNA may have not even, been heard of on some of the cases we looked at. Technology may, not have to the extent of certain geolocational data that are on cell phones or on phone records that we may have now. So I think the biggest challenge is not focusing on that. It's moving forward. Like, okay, we don't have this information. It was not obtained at that time by, not a malicious or no fault of any original agency, but where do we move forward? What outside the box thinking can we do now to move this case forward?
Yeah. So, like, for example, in this Sherman case, as far as we ever knew, the murder weapon, the knife or whatever was used in the stabbing was never located. So you don't focus on, man, I really wish we had that.
We don't. I mean, I think it's human nature as you read it to obviously maybe think, wow, I wish that still existed. But it doesn't, if it doesn't in this case. What we have to look at is, okay, where do we move forward? What else can we do? Are there other things that we can look at? Are there other people that haven't been talked to? I think cold cases usually have two almost directions they can go of when you're investigating them. You can look at it from the DNA advancement or technology advancement, what new analysis can be done on evidence from a forensic side, but there's also the data-driven side. What information within that case file and that documentation has not been completely followed up on? Are there people that haven't been interviewed? Have relationships changed over the course of, 7, 8, 10, 20 years, however long this case has went? Marriages may, dissolve. You may also have friendships that are no longer, the close friendships they were. So we look at it from, those both two perspectives.
Like, there are cases where secrets come out in time.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of relationships where perhaps there are secrets and perhaps those relationships have changed, but that person usually does not come forward to law enforcement. But if we seek them out, and that's where this data-driven aspect comes from, who can still be re-interviewed and what could they offer moving forward in these investigations?
It's very interesting. Is there anything I'm not asking you that's important?
I don't. Do you want anything about Sackerson or the website? I think, okay.
The only other thing I would ask you is just like for a ballpark of like how much time, like how long do you have a case? I mean, maybe until it's solved or forever?
We do. I mean,
Okay.
for the most part, we're at a point like there is just absolutely nothing to move forward with. And then it still doesn't mean isn't there if the right tip or information comes in, but it may not actively being worked like some of the ones that.
But this is right now, in these three, even though they're in different sort of stages, they're all being actively worked.
They're all actively
People
being
are
worked.
putting regular time in every week on
Right.
these cases.
They're-
And for
they're-
now, that continues.
And that's one of the important things of having a dedicated cold case unit, where the focus can be on these cold cases, as they come in, and their attention or their resources or personnel's responsibilities are to any of the cold cases we have open, not any other investigative activity.
So is it fair to say people will now be spending like hours every week on the Sherman case?
Absolutely. I mean, in a case like the Sherman case, there is extensive amount of documentation and case review. So there'll be many hours of assessment, review, and investigative processes with the case.
Okay. So how long from now do you hope to hold that like roundtable day?
I can't even answer that.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's such a variable.
Sure.
And
It's kind of once everybody's ready, once
right.
everybody has
It's
had the
once
time
that-
to review.
Once we make sure we have all documentation or case files from it, whether it's from multiple agencies, state, local, or federal, once we have that information and we've given ample time for any personnel involved to review it, is when we would schedule the case and evidence review.
And then just from the victim side of things, I mean, I feel like your victim advocate approach seems like it's also really important to BCI. We talked about the emotional side of things, but just how will you continue to keep Jennifer updated as things change?
I think Jennifer will be an integral part as we move forward. As I said, we all have a vested interest in this. And while there may be case-specific details that may not be able to be divulged to Jennifer, I've spoke to her and I've told her, look, we're going to be in constant contact. Whether it's with me or with our victims advocate or other personnel from criminal intelligence or the laboratory. Our goal is to work with you because she's obviously has a tremendous amount of knowledge as we move forward in this review of the investigation.